You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Indianapolis Speedway is a sentimental place for all its accent on technical excellence and harsh reality.
Soon, the 11 rows of three will unleash their furies down the main straightaway. 800 left-hand turns, 200 laps, 500 miles. We go now to the pace car.
For those 4 words that we have all been waiting to hear.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
And welcome to the 101st Indy 500 preview show. I'm joined today by AJ Jobe at Games of Jobes on social media. AJ, thanks for joining me today.
No, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. We go way back in the podcasting realm, so it's great to be back at it.
Exactly. We met a few years ago doing a soccer podcast like about Montreal and Columbus Crew, but that's a long time ago. Now talking about the Indianapolis 500 from Indiana, AJ. First of all, I want to start. What does the Indy 500 mean to you? This year seems to be a renewed interest in the 500. Yes, the Fernando Alonso effect is for real. We'll talk about this later. But what does this race mean to you?
Oh, that's such a loaded question because as an Indiana boy, the Indianapolis 500 is just something that you grow up with. It's almost a part of you. My father was a race car driver. My grandfather started going to the Indianapolis 500 in 1957, and until 2010. I had only missed one Indianapolis 500 in my lifetime because I had the measles. I missed 1987 when Al Unser won because I had the measles. Obviously, you can't go to the Indianapolis 500 if you have the measles. But it was something that I grew up with, and it really defined. Of course, I was a professional race car driver for 7 years of my life, short track racing, which is, what birthed Indianapolis. It was originally a part of the short track racing scene, sprint cars and champ cars and things like that. And it was my goal in life, as a race car driver. You went to the track every May, and you'd drive and you'd see the grandstands, and I'd get goosebumps, and it made me want to, it kept me out of trouble, honestly, because I wanted to be worthy of my heroes and the race and everything else, and that was what defined my youth. And to me, the Indianapolis 500, other than just a great way to get together and spend time with my family now, it's almost like a part of my family, really. It is the holiday every year.
And it's coming up this weekend. That's why I'm excited too, because, my birthday is May 27th. So it's always around my birthday. There you go. So Indy 500 has always been special to me. And I'm from Quebec. I'm from Montreal. So obviously over the years, there's been a lot of race car drivers from my neck of the woods that have performed either well or have been part of the race. And have always interested me into the race. One of the best known one is Jacques Villeneuve, of course, in 1995.
Absolutely.
Winning the race, right? And actually going for the Triple Crown and finishing second in Le Mans, the closest driver since Graham Hill to actually maybe talk about Triple Crown, and that's the subject we'll talk about later with Alonso's and his endeavor this year. So for me, the Indy 500 has always been a spectacle, and for years I was torn because I was on the champ car of the battle, right? You remember late 90s, 2000s, the champ car versus Indy car, and I was in the champ car because that's where Carpentier, that's where Tagliani, that's where Andrew Ranger was. So I was leaning towards champ car, and my drivers were not in the Indy 500, and I was always feeling like I was cheating on them by watching it on ABC, but still I could not miss this race because it's mythical. The images of archive images of like old cars in 1915 driving it, it still brings goosebumps to my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of stories. I mean, it goes all the way back to the first race in 1911. Ray Haroon, the winner of the race, is credited with creating the rear view mirror. Okay, I mean, it's in every car in the world, you have a rear view mirror, and because he did not have a riding mechanic in the Marmon Wasp number 32 that he drove to victory, he was required to do something about it. The drivers weren't going to let him race, and he put a rear view mirror on the car, and that is widely considered to be the world's first rear view mirror. And it goes from there. It's an international spectacle, and even though IndyCar might not be today what it once was because of the split. I mean, you go back, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s, IndyCar was the premier motorsport in North America. Now, internationally, F1 has always taken the top spot internationally. That's just the way it is. But everybody respected Indianapolis the way that they still do today. And when the split happened, it obviously took a little bit of that pageantry away. It took some of the drivers away, and it basically NASCAR came in and took over as far as North America goes. But it is still even with everything that goes on, it's not a huge TV spectacle anymore, but still more people gather in Speedway, Indiana on race day than they do for any other sporting event in the world. Okay, single day sporting events, you still get 350,000 people there. It becomes the second most populated city in all of Indiana on race day. So that should tell you what kind of an event we're talking about.
And getting ready for this show, I've looked a lot in the history of this race. And in the words of Fernando Alonso, he mentioned this early this week, early last week actually now, I've actually spent, AJ, every single day last week almost from noon to 6 watching the practice sessions. I'm fascinated by Alonso's decision and how he's actually handled the car and how he just seamlessly just changed series and dominated and beat world champions like nothing happened. Anyways, it's impressive to see the history of it's a race. It's not just the best car. It's not just the best engine. It's not just the best driver. It's a race of every single component of what motorsport racing is, could be, it will be. There's factors that don't change. The four corners don't change. They might change during the race, the condition, but what I mean is the same four corners year to year. You have a history with this place. It's everything but the track, and that's kind of fascinating to me.
And yeah, it's funny because you're right, and it's not changed. The layout hasn't changed since 1911. Now, I mean, it used to be made up of bricks, and that has obviously changed, and we've got all these safety components that are in play now. But the track is almost mystical because whenever you hear anybody talk about going to race at Indianapolis, and of course they're driving on the ragged edge at 230, 240 miles an hour, and they talk, obviously the track is so large, each corner is unique. Each corner has different wind patterns as the air moves between the grandstands. Each corner is normally a different temperature because some are in shade, some aren't. Turn 1 is basically blind, and it's mystical in that way because to win at that racetrack, to become an Indy 500 champion, you go down in history as one of the greatest drivers that ever lived. There, even though we've had this will be race number 101, the list of champions is not all that long, and then you have these great champions like Rick Mears and AJ Foyt, who have won it 4 times, Al Unser, and then you go through Mario Andretti. Mario Andretti, widely considered one of the greatest of all time, won. He's only got 1, so it's fantastic. It's a mystical place. It's a place that everybody in the world respects, no matter where you come from, no matter what form of motorsports you come from. When you're talking about Indy, you're talking about the most serious racing in the world.
And it's a place of heartbreaks and the place of glory at the same time. And you mentioned Mario Andretti. He wins it when he's young and then spends the rest of his life trying to get back to that same moment and not able to succeed. And his son spends his entire life trying to win it and not being able to succeed. He did win it 3 times as an owner, but that's different for Michael Andretti. I want to move to Fernando Alonso. The Fernando Alonso effect is for real. As an IndyCar fan, basically, it's in your blood, literally, AJ. What do you think of Fernando Alonso's decision to ride the Indy 500 maybe before his actual qualification? What did you think of his decision?
Well, I got to tell you, I am a huge Fernando Alonso fan. Even from his days in Formula One with McLaren and everything else. I mean, it's he's a guy that has always struck me as genuine more than anything. And my heroes used to be race car drivers that drove fast, and as I continue to get older, it's the men behind the helmet that really invest me in the actual sport itself. And he's always been upfront and honest and genuine, and he's a competitor now. Sometimes he'll bend some rules, but he's one of those guys that is a pure talent. He's raced against the best. He was one of the few that took it to Michael Schumacher in his prime. He's and he has always been a favorite of mine. And the actual, we talk about Fernando, but in actuality, Formula One drivers and great international drivers coming to race at Indianapolis, there's a long history to that as well. You go back to the 60s, Jimmy Clark, Graham Hill done it in 64, 66, or 65 and 66. And, it goes on and on. Emerson Fittipaldi, all of these great drivers. Nigel Mansell even came over and attempted it. It wasn't able to win the 500, but he was able to win the championship and compete with Newman Haas and everything else. And it's a challenge that I think speaks to these drivers because they're real racing men. You don't end up in Formula One without the drive to do everything, and that's what they want to do. He's won the world championship. He wants to come over here and test himself against the best of the best. And, he found a perfect partner because McLaren was willing to do it. He's got Andretti Racing on board, which has won many 500s. And it's just, it's been a perfect partnership. And I think he has positioned himself as good as he possibly could. So, I mean, how could he say no,
No, exactly. And we all know the type of season he had in Formula One over the last 2 years. And finding himself in a car that's competitive, it's an interesting aspect of this.
Yes.
The McLaren history at Indy as well, so you can tie everything together. The fact that he's getting a competitive car, and that brings me to his results. He's going to start 5th. We'll talk about the qualification in in the second segment. But he's going to start 5th. He surprised everyone in the entire racing world, outperforming world champion Indy 500 winners in his first go-around around an oval. How impressed were you by his qualification in his entire week at Indy so far?
I let me say this. Even though I am impressed, I am not surprised because I've always considered Fernando to be a fantastic racing talent, and I feel like I could take him to Eldora Speedway, which is a half-mile dirt short track, and I could put him in a sprint car, and I got a feeling he could get it. He could get it before the end of the evening, I feel that way about him. And being in that Andretti team, he's surrounded with great people. It just doesn't surprise me at all. But with that said, he is going into a race that he's never driven on an oval in his life. He's experiencing all these factors for the first time. He's experiencing, even though he's raced here on the road course, he's experiencing the oval of Indianapolis for the first time, which is, like I said, widely considered to be one of the most complicated racing ovals in the world. And he's crossed every hurdle. He's broken every barrier with poise. And it just speaks to his talent. And I feel like most other people aren't surprised either, but it says something about him. It says something about the organization he's with. And it is incredibly impressive to see. And even with that team, a couple years ago, Kurt Busch, the NASCAR champion, come over and ran the race as well. And he ran very well and finished very well. So it didn't surprise me to see this talented gentleman up front. But in the end, it is just 4 laps. He's put in a great 4 laps to put himself in the middle of row 2, and we're going to get to see really what he's made of on race day. But I do truly believe that he will be absolutely fine, and I hope to see him battling for the win. I honestly do.
To finish on Alonso with McLaren, Andretti, Honda, how good is it for the sport? To put everything in context, Formula One is not owned by American assets. Liberty Media. IndyCar, Verizon IndyCar Series is in North America mostly. And it cannot necessarily be denied that the enthusiasm on both parts with this project has caught people by surprise. There were over 800,000 people watching the rookie orientation program of Fernando Alonso. I was one of those. And the entire week, there have been record streaming numbers in countries that IndyCar have never even thought of before because of Fernando Alonso. How important would you think the partnership between, if there could be, with F1, with IndyCar, maybe just like it's perception, just drivers, like a change of drivers, a change of branding, maybe a McLaren full-time team in IndyCar, right? What's your thought on the entire situation and Alonso's beneficial run now with Indy?
I think it's very important, and I think the thing that we got to speak of, we talked about how IndyCar is not what it once was. It's not widely regarded as the best of the best. However, with that said, this series, the IndyCar series, is easily the most competitive racing series in the world. And I'll put it up against, you say I'll put it up against F1. F1, it's basically a lot of it's the car. You have to be with the Ferraris and the Mercedes to really compete for wins. And in the IndyCar series, you don't. I mean, you have multiple champions, multiple Indy 500 winners, and you really, if you run 12th in the IndyCar series on any odd week, you have done something. It's a true feat because it is very extremely competitive. But because it doesn't have that worldwide flair, because it doesn't have the big TV deals, it doesn't get a lot of attention. This race, the Indianapolis 500, is the only time that anybody pays attention to the IndyCar series all year. So it's very important that they do this race correctly as far as a marketing and PR sense. And by getting Fernando Alonso to come, by making this possible, and which is no easy feat, mind you, because he is missing one of the largest Formula One races of the year. And of course, he's not in an extremely competitive car. But could you imagine if Bernie Ecclestone was still in charge at Formula One? That he would have shut that down quickly.
That would have never happened in a million years.
Because in reality it looks like the Indianapolis 500 is more important. You know, that's the thing that by him jumping over it makes the Indianapolis 500 more important, and by him doing well it makes the Indianapolis 500 look bad because here comes this guy. Yeah, he's a world champion, but he's brand new and he just comes in and runs really well. But the fact that both the IndyCar series and Formula One were able to come together and get over all of the egos involved and all of the red tape and make it happen is a fantastic thing. And I think it helps both, honestly. I really do, because as much as Formula One is popular overseas, it is basically in America, it is very comparable to IndyCar. There's not very many people that pay attention. They tune into NASCAR on Sundays and they don't watch a whole lot of Formula One. And with Americans, of course, we're used to ovals. And I try to tell people when you're talking about ovals and road courses, road course people, they like to attack the track and they're beating the clock. They're trying to shave seconds or tenths off of their time to catch the guy in front of them. And oval people, they're very much about side-by-side action. They're racing the drivers. You're racing those personalities and touching wheels and things like that. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. And when you can bring those two worlds together and everybody's happy when you're doing it, it's a monumental feat. And I think it really does help both organizations.
I have to agree with you, and the way you put it, they put the egos in check. I agree. It's like the F1 agreed to say, you know what, it's not beneath us to be with you guys, and it's IndyCar series, or quote unquote what you think about North American racing attitude of, you know what, we're in the real grease, we're mechanics, and what you do is space technology. It's like those two worlds merging, and we're seeing just great result happen. And you know what, I've said on Scuderia F1, our Formula One show on the network, AJ, I've said my ideology for the future, maybe everything, is auto racing having brands that exist in multiple series. I would love to see a Ferrari side to IndyCar and have McLaren team and a Mercedes team and having them battle in this series with their young drivers maybe, and the then you go to F1 further, right? Something like this maybe is the future. If you really want F1 to be popular in North America, you need to invest money in North America. And if they invest money in IndyCar, it could be the start of that.
Yeah, and you know, that's it's something that's always, I'm sure, has always been on their minds. And of course we know that money makes the racing world go round. So it's a complicated thing to do. And we talked about egos, you know, if you know the IndyCar series doesn't want to look at themselves as a feeder series for Formula 1. But, you know, when you are able to do that, it racing marketing is still very much grassroots. You know, the best way to get people excited about the races is to talk to them about them, get them to the races, and then have them connect with the drivers in the cars, have them connect to the cars. That, you know, that's one of NASCAR's greatest strengths, because the cars that they race, even though they are, you know, pure race cars, they are comparable to what people drive on the street every day. And that's always been a huge driving force, because if you drive a Chevy, you watch the Chevy drivers try to win that weekend. And, you know, the problem that IndyCar series has had is they find it tough to get people to connect to these drivers. And it is an international cast. You know, Scott Dixon, one of the most winningest drivers in IndyCar history now, you know, comes from Australia, and you know, it's hard to sell an Australian IndyCar driver to a farmer in Nebraska. But these are the things that you must do to be able to survive as a series in America. And because you bring in a guy like Fernando, because you bring in these guys and say, hey, he's going to do this too. He's one of us. He is, you know, so here is this guy, this Formula One guy. We're bringing him down, and he's going to run with us and become one of us. And then when he goes back, let's follow him as he goes. You know, he's now one of us, so we can't lose him.
Exactly, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. We'll take a quick break with some great Indy 500 moments, and we'll be back with a little bit of overview of who's in the IndyCar racing news right now, who are the teams, and who are the favorites heading to the race on Sunday.
The white flag is about to come out at Indianapolis. He's out of fuel. He's out of fuel. Wow. Robbie Gordon is out of fuel as Kenny Brack comes out and takes a white flag. One more lap to go in the Indy 500. Incredible heartbreak for Robbie Gordon, out of fuel.
Headed for Formula One in the next couple of years for Williams.
White flag.
Indeed, the white flag is coming out.
White flag, one to go.
One more lap to go for Juan Montoya. Again, a rookie has not won the Indianapolis 500 since 1966 when Graham Hill drove to victory. It looks like that Juan Montoya is going to do it here this afternoon.
They're the winner of the Indianapolis 500. Pal.
Indeed, 24-year-old Juan Montoya wins the 84th running of the Indianapolis 500.
And we're back on the 101st edition of the Indy 500 preview show. Kevin Laramee joined by AJ Jobe. AJ, I have to say I put Montoya there because, well, who knows what could happen with Alonso on Sunday. A lot of great performances, a lot of great results. Qualification were somewhat surprising with small teams like Carpenter Racing starting on the front grid. But before we actually look at the grid, which team impresses you more in the IndyCar series? There's big teams, there's small teams. Is there one in particular that tickles your fancy?
Well, I mean, anytime you talk about the IndyCar series, it is almost built on the success of one team. It's a team that's won the most championships. It's a team that's won the most Indy 500s. You know, anybody that's familiar would know I'm talking about Team Penske. Roger Penske has the most rock solid organization, you know, from the very bottom to the top. I mean, Rick Mears is the guy that's driving golf carts for the team members, you know. Okay, so if you got Rick Mears as your golf cart driver, you're doing all right.
First of all, you'll never be late because if Rick Mears drives your cart, you'll be there on time.
You have no problem. You'll never have any issues there. But we talk about Team Penske being such historically favorites, but they struggled. They struggled in qualifying a lot, and that was one of the biggest surprises in qualifying. So I mean, when you think about IndyCar, you think about Team Penske, but they've really you got multiple Indy 500 wins there, and they are really in the hole going into Sunday. So it's you, like you said, with the small teams up top and the big teams in the back, it's really turned things on its head.
Legendary names here in the owner circle and on the track. Let's start with Caesar. We're going to give credit to Caesar where it's due. And should I say maybe a Mexican name? Because unfortunately, after getting the pole, Scott Dixon got robbed at a Taco Bell at a drive-thru later on. What a weird situation that must have feel like. You're actually getting robbed by two teenagers at a Taco Bell after just winning maybe getting the pole that it's the biggest moment of your career maybe. So yeah, what a weird and surreal world we live in.
When I was 15 years old, I thought I was tough and fearless, but I don't think I was tough enough to hold an Indy 500 champion at gunpoint at a Taco Bell. And we laugh about it. It's obviously incredibly scary, I'm sure.
Yeah, they got arrested, so that's good. The teenagers will be dealt with, yes. Right? So.
But I mean, you're talking about a life-altering event to be held at gunpoint. But it is kind of a tough neighborhood somewhere around there. But it is very strange, and there's always those stories. There's always those strange stories around this race. It's what makes it a huge spectacle. But I'm sure that's one Scott Dixon and Dario Franchitti could have done without.
Chip Ganassi Racing, which if you heard during the break, Juan Montoya when he won. He was for Chip Ganassi Racing. So Chip Ganassi Racing starting on the pole with Scott Dixon. Ed Carpenter of Ed Carpenter Racing, surprisingly second. Ed Carpenter is, and no offense here, I don't mean any offense at all to Ed Carpenter, but he's like the cockroach of IndyCar. You can't kill him. He's always there. He's always present. Year after year, finds a way to be successful when the bright lights are shining.
And, he wouldn't be offended by that at all. I think he wears it as a badge of honor. I mean, here is a guy who started on the short tracks, one of the very few that still comes from that sprint car background. I mean, I was sitting at Winchester when this guy come off of turn 4 and made contact with Mark Jessup, and he nearly come through the catch fence right in front of us. A very scary deal, but we talk about being able to relate to people. I relate to Ed Carpenter, and, this is – he's a two-time Indy 500 pole sitter, so to be starting second is no real surprise, but it is a surprise because that team is so small. It's even smaller than it was a year ago, because he was running two cars. You had Joseph Newgarden, who has now moved on to Penske, and then of course Carpenter, who only runs the ovals. It's a complicated thing, but he somehow always manages to be there. But he's still looking for that good run on race day. He normally runs up front, and then really around the 150 lap mark he finds trouble. So he's got to find a way to put an entire race day together.
Alexander Rossi, winner of last year's 100th running of the Indy 500, with a surprising move, saving fuel and doing one pit stop less than anybody, and won the race to the surprise of everyone by coasting to the finish line. Basically, will start third. The first of the Andretti Racing contingent, 6 cars for Michael Andretti. Some of them are branded differently, like McLaren Honda Andretti, but Andretti Herta Autosport with curb. That's a mouthful. Just say Andretti Herta for Rossi.
Right. Yeah, the Agajanian car, which actually has a very rich history. You're talking about going back to the 60s. A.J. Foyt used to drive the Agajanian car and won in it. So it's a historic name, even though it is hard to say. And Alexander Rossi, of course, I must confess, I have had to warm up to Alexander Rossi. I've had issues with him in the past. Of course, American, fantastic talent, went to F1 and done the best he could with the limited funding that he had, and he is very good. But he's always one to open his mouth and say things sometimes that were detrimental to IndyCar. And he is he had made a few enemies in that way. And as soon as his F1 stuff ran out, he came looking to IndyCar for something to do, and it seemed like the tide had turned there. So when he won last year, I wasn't the happiest person, but by following it a little bit, I have found him to be a genuine person, and I think we can all give the young man a little bit of slack, because as young men we do tend to say things that maybe we're not entirely don't entirely mean or don't entirely understand.
He was raised in an environment where, you remember what we talked about before the break, the ego and the F1 attitude of IndyCar is beneath them. That's a different era now. Maybe now people realize it's different. IndyCar is not F1. Sometimes it can be as fast, sometimes they're faster, sometimes they're slower. They're not built the same way. They're not made to do the same thing. The technology is different, and it's more closer to an actual race car where you can race with, where it's not necessarily about the car, but it makes it more about the driver. And I think Alexander Rossi became more humble with the time, with the victory, with his experience in IndyCar after going through F1, by realizing that, you know what? It's different, yes, but it doesn't mean that it's beneath F1. It doesn't mean that it's different in a way that you have to appreciate what it is for what it is. It can be better, yeah. Can it be different? Yeah. But you have to appreciate things for what they are sometimes, and I think that's what probably happened with Rossi over the last 12 months.
Yeah, and that comes with experience. And he's been a great champion. And like anybody on race day at Indianapolis, if you cross the finish line first, I'm always going to tip my hat to you, because it doesn't matter whether you win on fuel mileage or speed or anything else. You've just won the greatest race in the world. And, he definitely did it. They did it. They played it perfectly. That was the second time that team has won the Indianapolis 500. Of course, they did it first with Dan Weldon in 2011, and they earned it. And he is a good driver. He's a fantastic talent, and I expect as he continues to mature in the IndyCar series, he's only going to get better.
Now we'll go quickly through just a few other big names because they ring a bell. Takuma Sato. Takuma, it's been a long time I haven't seen you. You're still here? You're still driving? Oh, it's great to see you, Takuma. It's going to start fourth.
Yeah, and still fast, too. I mean, this is a guy, you want to talk about a guy who's happy. He's been driving an underpowered Foyt car for years, and here he is with the Andretti team, with Panasonic money behind it. This is a guy who went side by side with Dario Franchitti on the final lap of the Indianapolis 500 in, 2012. The two made contact, and Dario went on, and Sato ended up in the fence. So this is a guy that you can't count out as well. We all know Takuma Sato can be the first car in the wall, and he can also be one of the fastest cars on the track. So that's one you don't want to take your eyes off of.
First on the wall or first on the bricks. Hey, he's maybe first. That's going to be interesting. Fernando Alonso, fifth. That is probably the most impressive performance. I can't overstate how Fernando Alonso, for me, AJ, not only has made me rediscover IndyCar, rediscover racing, rediscover endurance racing by paying attention to Le Mans, because the Triple Crown might be what he's going to do in the future. It might take him a few years to win Indy 500, granted. But starting fifth, what do you think about him starting fifth? How impressive is that?
It's very impressive, and he's off to a fantastic start. I mean, when you're talking about Indianapolis, one of the biggest hurdles he's going to face on race day is that first lap, and they always talk about it. There's so much turbulence in the first lap that it really catches people out. That's why you see so many turn 1 and 2 accidents, because these cars are made to have downforce on those wings. And if with so much turbulence, with so many fast cars in the same spot at once, it takes that downforce off the wings and it causes problems for drivers. But the fact that Fernando has been able to qualify himself at the front, it means that he's going to be one of those cars that is creating the turbulence for the cars behind him. So he's automatically taken one of those hurdles hurdles and minimized it for himself. I think one of his biggest struggles on race day, of course, will be pit stops. He's used to pit stops, but they're much different than what he is used to that he's going to experience on Sunday. So he's got to make sure that he can get into pit road, get under that speeding limit, and then get back out on the track. And the biggest thing he's going to have to face is patience. He's used to running all out in Formula One at all times. You have tire warmers in Formula One where they do not allow that in IndyCar. So he's going to be going out on cold tires, and you have to be patient because it is a 200-lap race, and you cannot win it until you get to lap 200. So he's got to be willing to be patient, get to lap 150, really start turning it up. And then we're going to see really what that team and what he is made of as well. Because once you get to the end of those teams start trimming the downforce off the rear wings. They start making adjustments. The race gets quicker, more dangerous. But he's got to make sure that he is there so that come the end of the race, he can be racing for that large Borg-Warner trophy.
And the last position in the first 2 rows of the race that will happen on Sunday is J.R. Hildebrand of Ed Carpenter Racing. That's quite a feat. Not only Ed Carpenter second, but 2 cars in the top 6. There are only 2 cars in the top 6, and that's quite impressive.
Very, very strong from J.R. Hildebrand. But that's another one that's no surprise. You're talking about a guy who, as a rookie in 2011, was 1 corner away from taking the biggest crown of his racing career. He came through turn 4 leading by half a lap over Dan Weldon and made contact with the fence trying to navigate a lap car, and Dan Weldon beat him to the line. He crossed the line on 2 tires sliding after his crash, and it was so close to winning the biggest race of them all. It would not surprise me to see him staying up front all day, but he's definitely got a chip on his shoulder because he was the sickest man in America that day, and he would very much like to be the happiest man in America on Sunday.
We'll take our last quick break, and when we come back, AJ, to finish the show, I will ask you for 2 predictions. The prediction of your head, your brain, and maybe the prediction of your heart as well.
So half a lap lead, clutch and coast, save fuel, clutch and coast.
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking about Robbie Gordon running out of gas back in 1999.
Got this, bring it home, he's down to 2. Hey, push.
He's done it. Checkered flag is in the air. A first-timer is going to win the 100th Indianapolis 500-mile race. California's Alexander Rossi to the checkered flag, and he's done it.
Checkered flag, you just won the Indy 500, baby! Oh my God! Let's go! Oh my God!
Yeah, I think I've actually, with the choice of song and moments, I think I'm pretty much giving away what my heart is saying for the race on Sunday. But I'll start with you, AJ. Who is your head predicting you to win the 101st running of the Indy 500?
Well, it is a very complicated thing because there are so many good drivers out there that can do it. And the thing come race day, it's always interesting because you have these teams that focus on qualifying so much, and sometimes that can take away from the consistency that they need on the race car as well. You'll see a lot this Friday when they go out for Fast Friday, Carburation Day, and try to figure out where their car works in traffic, where they're at, because it's going to be a new type of running that they've not practiced up to this time. But, obviously there are cars out there that are super quick. Scott Dixon has won this race before. I expect to see him right there. I do not expect I would not be surprised to see Fernando up there fighting. Ed Carpenter's going to be right there. But, one guy that I would like to point out, okay, actually I can't even really point out one because there's 2 drivers on this Andretti team that are always right there come race day every single time. Ryan Hunter-Reay, of course, has won this race before in fantastic fashion. He's proven to be great at Indianapolis. But also one guy that always gets overshadowed because he's got such famous lineage. Marco Andretti has been looking to win this race for years. He is one of only 2 drivers to ever lose this race while leading off of turn 4. Sam Hornish beat him to the line one year, and he has finished second so many times in this race. And I would not be surprised to see him up there competing as well. But I got to tell you, we talked about Penske. If my head is going to go anywhere, and it is actually tough to say this because he is starting in 19th position, okay? Yeah. But we need to talk about Mr. Helio Castroneves, because this is a man that has won this race 3 times. This is a man that there is nothing that will happen on Sunday that will surprise him. He is so experienced. He is so calm. He is one of the greatest drivers to ever set foot on the famed grounds of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And even though he's starting 19th, when you look at the timesheets on Friday for practice, I guarantee you will see him up at the top of that timesheet, and I will guarantee you that if he does not get caught up in some first lap melee, before long you will see Helio Castroneves running up front and contending for this race. So if I have to pick a favorite as far as my head goes, I'm going to go with Helio Castroneves. But if we're talking about heart, I told you I'm a huge Fernando Alonso fan, and even though I'm an IndyCar boy and I follow the IndyCar drivers, I would love to see Fernando pull this race out. I'm beyond the point of where I would be offended if a Formula One driver would come over and win our great race, our great American race. I would be more than ecstatic to celebrate a Fernando Alonso victory. And I should tell you the story of how I became such a big Fernando Alonso fan. My wife, actually, who is a big race fan, but she when we got together, when we first got married, she decided that she was going to be a Lewis Hamilton fan. And when it was actually the first year that Fernando Alonso, the only year that he signed on for McLaren and was teammates with Lewis Hamilton, and they had that titanic battle between the 2 drivers fighting in the pits and everywhere else, and that actually really bonded me to Fernando and her to Lewis Hamilton as well. So I would not be surprised to see him up there, and I'd absolutely love to rub that in her face that Fernando would win that one.
Well, my head kind of agrees with you. Marco Andretti has come so close, and one part of the reasoning is me and the number 27 go a long way. I said that I like Jacques Villeneuve, number 27, winner of the Indy 500. But I like Gilles Villeneuve, his father, which only raced once with the number 27, but it was when he won in Montreal, and it's something special to me, the number 27, to this day. And it's often close to the date of the actual Indy 500 itself, too. So for me, Marco Andretti, it would be the driver that I would choose with my head. Got a great car, Andretti, 3 cars in the top 10, actually 4 cars in the top 10 for Andretti. They're having a great season, and Marco Andretti, I think, is poised to win it and finally get that monkey off his shoulder, and having the advice of his dad and his grandfather. You're better to win it when you're young, because you never know if you can actually win it or not after, and that becomes a big burden on your shoulders. But my heart agrees with you as well. Fernando Alonso. How great would it be for Fernando Alonso to win the Indy 500 and go on to actually go try to do endurance and win the Triple Crown? Go on, Fernando Alonso. You've impressed me. You've shown me with your 7th qualifying position 2 weeks ago in Russia. Was it in Russia? I can't remember. It's been too long. In Spain, sorry.
Right.
So his 7th position in Spain, that was impressive with a god-awful car. And now 5th in the Indy 500. Yeah, I think you are maybe, arguably, the best driver on the planet. And Fernando, I want you to win, please, on Sunday.
I would love it so much. He is such a fantastic talent, and we saw it at Renault when he started, and he's been quick in every car that he's ever run. Even when the cars aren't quick, he is quick. And of course, Formula One has a great history of amazing drivers, but I put him right up there at the top. I think you put he and Senna in the exact same car, and those boys are going to be wheel to wheel all the way around the track. I really do, and it's just, it would be great. It would be great to see him prove that to America in a way that he's not been able to do so far. And that's, and like I said, he's such a genuine person. I mean, we've seen in the past that, when Juan Pablo won his first race, he came over from kart, came to Indianapolis in the year 2000 and really skunked the field. I mean, he led like 170, 180 laps of the race. It was very simple for him. And in Victory Lane, he kind of spoke of it like it was simple, But Fernando Alonso, a world champion, can come over, and were he to be in Victory Lane tasting the milk, I'm sure he would be incredibly gracious and ecstatic and a true champion for sure.
AJ, Jobe, thank you so much for doing this today. It was an amazing pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be back doing a little podcasting, which is something that I've always loved. I don't get to podcast anymore. I've switched over to the video side with my Twitch channel and everything. But it is nice to be able to talk to you once more.
And for AJ Jobe, I'm Kevin Laramee. See you on the track. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.